I think often when we talk about war, it's done in a way that is so sanitized that the suffering and the displacement and the trauma of the survivors of war are not adequately represented. There is a quote by Martin Luther King that I'm inspired by. And in speaking about the civil rights movement, he said that at the end of the day, we will not only remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I choose not to be that silent friend. Before the war, I had a pretty normal upbringing. My father was a major in the Army. My mother owned grocery stores. I had 3 younger siblings. I remember several instances where in the evenings when we were in our home, we would hear bombings or we would hear gunfire go off, and we would get under our beds for protection. The Vietnam War lasted for a long time. So throughout my childhood, my dad was at war. He was out in the battlefield. He, would go off on different missions and come back. The country fell on April 30th, 1975. My parents knew that if we stayed in Saigon, it might be difficult to get out. And so they made plans for us to go to Phu Quoc Island. My parents sat down and had a conversation with my siblings and me, and they said that we were going to go on vacation, but my father would not be coming with us. Unfortunately, the affect did not match the content. My mom was tearful and crying in this conversation, and my father looked very serious and worried. We went to the airport on April the 6th to go to Phu Quoc Island, and I remember my dad being there and me saying goodbye to him, and I was sitting on his lap, and I saw that there were tears running down his face. And that was the first time that I had ever seen him cry. So I knew that something was amiss. Once we got to the island, we were there for about 3 weeks, and the second week into our stay there, my mom had made dog tags for all of us, and with our names and our addresses on there. And she also assigned each of us a bag with 1 change of clothing and a few essential items. I remember seeing her one day as she was packing pictures of my father, weeping. And I remember when I would sleep at night, sometimes I would hear her crying. So those were the signs that something bad was going to happen. The late evening of the 29th of April was when we made our first escape. It was around 11 o'clock, so it was very late at night, and I was already asleep, and all of a sudden I hear, get up, it's time to go. Do not turn on the lights. And I ran along with my family, and I could remember looking down below. There were all these people running in the street. The unfortunate thing was that I couldn't find my shoes. And so I ran barefoot, and I could feel the earth under my feet, the gravel, and then the sand as we got closer to the ocean. I could remember just the tension and the fear. We started walking to the ocean where there were fishing boats, and we were running back and forth, asking everybody to try to take us out. Somebody finally agreed to take us out. My mom took our big sack of money and said, here, this is all yours. If you take us out, this is all yours. And he agreed to take us out. We were on these boats trying to get out to the ship, and I remember the sight. There were just hundreds of these smaller fisher boats, and they were hugging the scow, which was connected to this white big ship. And so in order to get on the ship, we had to jump 20 boats in order to get onto the scow. And I remember seeing dead bodies floating in the water. And I was terrified. And the minute that I got onto the scow, it was pure pandemonium. People were trampling on each other. People were fearful. I was squashed in between all these people. And at that point, I remember the loudspeaker going off and saying, "Everybody, stay calm. Women and children are going to be let on board first." And I remember the horn of the ship going off. And I had no idea what was happening. But what I saw was that the ship began to leave the scow. And I was terrified. And the next thing I remember were the loud crying. And I remember seeing the faces of the Navy men on the ship, and their faces were red, and there were tears running down their faces. The journey took 5 days. We were packed in like sardines. We were cramped in a space that was about the size of a dining room table. And people, did not have enough food. And it was really the survival of the fittest. You could hear people fighting with each other about, "You stole this from me and you stole that from me." Unfortunately, when we were on the ship, my mom did meet some people who knew of what might have happened to my dad. So they told my mom that they thought they heard the communists come into our home, and they thought they heard my dad being killed. And so my mom during the day would, appear very strong, and she is a very courageous woman. But at night, as we were sleeping, I could hear her crying. About 4 days after we arrived, my mom went to the mess hall, and she had my sister Jane with her, and she stood in line. And all of a sudden, she felt somebody tap her on the back, and she turned around, and it was my dad. It was my dad. He made it. The whole experience, I think, makes us very appreciative of everything that we have. When I first came, I didn't speak any English. And so the way I excelled in school was that I had a Vietnamese English dictionary. And I would look up every single word to do my homework. I knew that I wanted to go to college, but we did not have money. And so I worked 2 and 3 jobs to put myself through a private school in high school so I could get scholarships to go to UC Berkeley and then move on to get my master's and doctorate in clinical psychology. The experience has colored everything that I do in my life and continue to do.
These personal Vietnam War stories are made possible by these sponsors.